The animals that have the parasites in their gut have significantly less heavy metals in their internal organs. They find the heavy metals actually sequestered inside the parasite in the gut. But the animals who don't have the parasites, their internal organs are riddled with this heavy metal. So the parasites are there basically to try and keep the stuff in the small intestine, then into the large intestine and move it out in your feces. They're there as sentinels. They're like the bouncer at the nightclub. So don't blame the bouncer at the nightclub for the riffraff. When you blame nature, your focus is on those things and it's never on the true cause of the problem. And then when someone comes along and goes, hey, you guys are being poisoned, everyone's like, what are you talking about, you crazy fool?
In this thought-provoking episode of the Radical Health Rebel podcast, I welcome back author and health researcher Daniel Roytas for a deep dive into some of the most foundational and conversational beliefs in modern health. We explore the origins and flaws of germ theory, the misunderstood roles of mold, fungus, and parasites, and why the terrain, not the invader, might hold the real answers to chronic illness. Daniel shares why he walked away from a successful career in naturopathy and academia, and how his research has led him back to nature, simplicity, and the body's innate intelligence. We challenge the mainstream view of pathogens, examine the overlooked role of environmental toxicity, and question everything from probiotics to fibre to functional medicine protocols. If you've ever wondered whether bacteria, parasites, or even inflammation are actually part of the problem or part of the solution, this episode will open your mind in the best way. This is the final episode of the Radical Health Rebel podcast before we rebrand to Beyond the Pain. And what a blockbuster to go out on. It's bold, eye-opening, and the perfect way to close this chapter and step into a new era focused on chronic pain and its root causes. Dan also shares some visuals in this episode, so I highly recommend watching on YouTube or Rumble for the full experience. Whether you're a health practitioner or someone questioning the mainstream narrative, this episode offers powerful insights grounded in curiosity, honesty, and deep inquiry. Daniel, welcome back to the Radical Health Rebel podcast. It's great to have you back on.
Hi, Lee. Great to speak with you again, mate. Thanks for the invitation to come and speak with you on your podcast.
Yeah, it's great to have you back on. So what I want to discuss today is something that I guess is a little bit self-indulgent because it's questions that I have in my own mind, but I think they're questions that I think are very important for everyone else to hear as well. And I feel like some of what you're going to say today is going to challenge my own beliefs, but I think that's a good thing because I think without challenging your own beliefs, you're never going to get to the truth because, you know, we're so conditioned in many ways, but we often don't know where we're conditioned. And without asking those questions, you never find your blind spots. So that's kind of the angle that I'm coming from today. Now, I qualified in functional diagnostic nutrition back in 2008. And I would say the training was really good, but obviously that's 17 years ago. The course has been updated and I have gone through the new material, I think it was last year actually, and it has changed a lot. But, you know, the work of yourself, the Baileys, Andy Kaufman, Tom Cowan, has really made me start to question a lot of what I've been taught, not just in functional medicine, but I guess my whole training in terms of holistic health. So what I really want to do today is to ask you a lot of questions of things that I've got floating around in my head. Some things that I'm kind of not sure about. Now, what I would say is I've helped a lot of people in the last 17 years since I did my training with functional diagnostic nutrition. So I must have been doing something right. What I feel is that maybe the mechanism of helped the person get to the right result might not have been the way that I thought it was, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
So I definitely don't feel like I need to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but perhaps what would be useful is to understand the mechanisms of what I've done and why that's helped people. Does that make sense?
Sure.
But again, we'll dig into it as we go. So for those who haven't heard our previous conversation, and for those who haven't, I really highly recommend you go back and listen to that episode that we did. Was it last year or this year? Can't remember now.
Oh, gee, time goes by so
It was a while
quickly. I
ago,
think it
wasn't it?
was.
It was a while ago.
I think it was late last year.
Yeah, may have been. So for those people that haven't listened to that episode yet, could you briefly share your background and explain what led you to step away from your role as a senior lecturer in naturopathy?
I graduated from a degree in naturopathic medicine in 2010 and went on to do some postgraduate study in human nutrition and psychotherapy, hypnotherapy, various other modalities, and then worked as a lecturer in naturopathic and nutritional medicine at colleges and universities around Australia for over a decade. Had my own clinic, which I practiced in for around the same length of time. And then in 2020, I had a realization that everything that I thought I knew about health and wellness and the human body is probably in some desperate need of reevaluation. And I've spent the last 5 years looking at basically everything from nutrition to vitamins to herbal medicine to virology to microbiology to disease, everything. And have almost thrown out everything that I had learnt and taught in my training and as a lecturer. And here I am now with a sort of newfound understanding, which has brought me right back to the very, very fundamental things of health and wellness that I learnt in maybe my first 6 months of my undergraduate qualification. And all of that stuff that I learnt then, I dismissed because I thought it was very simple. I thought it was very basic. I was like, yeah, everybody knows this. Let me get to the juicy stuff. Let me get to the third and fourth year where I can start learning the real nutritional biochemistry and how to do the testing and how to do the prescribing and this kind of thing. And yeah, I've since realized that all of that stuff really isn't the most important thing. The important thing is the fundamentals and the basics. And those are the things that people need to get right in order to heal themselves. But everybody overlooks those things because they're free, they're readily available, they are low barrier to entry, they're very simple. And most people don't pay any attention to them because how good can something be that's simple, easy, and free? So that's where I am now. I'm just taking a really back to basics approach to healthcare and asking the question, how do I know what I know? And going right back to the foundational papers and evidence on a lot of these things where claims are made about a certain topic and just really breaking it all down and shifting lots of paradigms. So maybe we'll get into a few different topics today.
Yeah, it's interesting. You talk about simplicity, getting back to basics. One of the first things we teach our students at the Czech Institute is what we call the 6 foundation principles. Correct breathing, hydration, nutrition, movement, sleep. Very simple, right? And it was interesting, when I read terrain theory, it's just talking about the 6 foundation factors. And again, I want to talk about, when I did my training with FDN, the model, if you like, is called Dress for Health Success. So the D stands for diet. The R stands for, what does R stand for? Rest. E, exercise. And then you've got stress reduction, and then you've got supplementation. So again, apart from the supplementation, again, it's going back to basics, right? And again, if you think about how our ancestors lived for thousands of years, they wouldn't have been able to do anything else. Right? It's just getting back to nature, isn't it? It is very, very simple, even though nature in itself is very complex. Actually living in accordance with nature is actually quite simple. We've made it very complicated with modern society. Were there any key beliefs or key things that maybe started you on that process of questioning? Was there like maybe one thing that really sparked you, or, well, hang on a minute, that doesn't seem right?
I've always questioned things. That's why I got into alternative medicine to begin with, rather than going down the mainstream path. But in 2020, I heard some doctors talking about this concept that germs aren't the cause of illness. And I've heard about this before. We got taught that in our undergraduate degree, so I wasn't a stranger to that information, but I dismissed it because I thought that we're living in a scientific society now. We've thrown out all the pseudoscience and we're operating off things that have been proven empirically and scientifically. And when I heard these doctors talking about it, I thought, hang on a second, why are these educated people talking about something that was disproven 100 years ago? And I remembered, I got taught that in my undergraduate degree, and I started looking back through all the history and the papers and went, wow, they're actually right. We don't know what we think we know. And that was the starting point for me. And then after that, I started looking at this whole idea of disease, because we're told in modern society that, once you realize that a germ isn't the enemy, you start asking the question, well, what does cause illness? And that basically led me to this point where I started questioning disease and what causes it. And it dawned on me that there was a point in time, not so long ago, that humans were living in harmony with nature, and our default state when in nature is health. So there was a paper published in The Lancet, I think maybe 2017 from memory, and they did a review on some data sets and found that over 96% of people in the world have at least one health problem. So no one's healthy. Less than 3% of the population, or less than 4% of the population has a health problem. Now, when I went looking for data where anthropologists and medical doctors have journeyed out into the wilderness and connected with uncontacted tribes and basically did lots of health and medical assessments on them, they all reported a similar thing, regardless of which native tribe they came in contact with. They were all healthy. So less than 3% of them had a health condition. So it's sort of like the flip side of where we are today. 97% of people are sick. Not so long ago, 97% of people were healthy. So they weren't reporting any cancer, stroke, heart attack, basically any cardiovascular disease, obesity, overweight, depression, anxiety, gastrointestinal disorders, metabolic problems, thyroid issues, nothing. These things weren't around. And I thought, that's really interesting, because we're told that those people are really stupid and they're living in the dark ages and they don't know anything, that they're these Neanderthals, these savages who are just completely illiterate and have no concept of anything of purpose or meaning. And we just think of them as these sort of Neolithic people living in the dark ages. But the fact of the matter is that they were all healthy. So, and they didn't have hospitals, they didn't have clinics on every corner, they didn't have naturopaths, they didn't have nutritionists or homeopaths or acupuncturists, or they had none of what we have today. They didn't have antibiotics, they had nothing. So how is it that they were all healthy? What did they know that we didn't know? For people who have access to no technology and no healthcare, they were sure healthy. So what's the difference there between what they were doing and what we're doing? And when that dawned on me, I thought, oh yeah, okay. It's actually really very simple. They had it all worked out and all they were doing was living in harmony with nature. And when you come to that realization, you basically have to reevaluate everything you think you know about health and wellness, because in today's modern age, we're also wrapped up in all the fancy, shiny stuff to try and biohack that we forget the very, very fundamental principles, and that when you get them right, you give the body what it needs, you get out of the way and you stop poisoning yourself, the body heals itself. And that's really quite powerful information, and it takes a lot of the guesswork out of health, and it takes a lot of the confusion out of it. So that's where I am at like currently, and who knows where my next little investigative research will take me, what topic I'll be looking at next.
So it's quite interesting. So you were saying in 2020 was when you really started to question things, which isn't that long ago, really.
Yeah,
right?
5 years.
Wow. So when did you start writing your book? I mean, that's a pretty big book you've written there.
Pretty much in I think it was 2021.
Oh.
Yeah. So that's when I started doing the research, late 2020 or early 2021. Just about contagion. We were being told that there is this phenomenon called contagion, and I heard these doctors saying, no, there's not. And I thought, well, it's really easy to prove that. Surely there's experiments where people have been put into a room with sick people and they just see what happens. And it turns out there's hundreds of these experiments and they all failed to demonstrate contagion. So I was just accruing those documents throughout 2020 and 2021. And then Roman Bystrianic, the author of Dissolving Illusions, came to me and said, hey, man, we've got some really good data there. You need to put this into a book. And the rest is history.
Yeah, for those that haven't listened to my episode with Roman as well, you need to get onto that one as well, especially if you think that vaccines has cured any disease, because the numbers don't back that up either. Moving on, let's talk fungus and parasites, because again, in the functional medicine world, there's quite big things. So we're often told that they're the cause of disease, and even, in mainstream and in functional medicine, not so much in functional medicine now, but certainly it used to be, is that the approach would be to identify and eliminate, right? That's the bad guy. We've got to kill the bad guy. Certainly that's still the case in conventional medicine. I definitely think functional medicine is moving away from that. But in terms of, fungus and parasites, they're bad guys, they're the cause of disease, we need to get rid of them. Do you think that's too simplistic a belief, or even an incorrect belief?
Nature doesn't do disease. Nature wants to maintain a state of balance and harmony. When that harmony or balance is disrupted, it starts to employ or initiate certain things to bring itself back into balance. Now, if we'll talk about mold and fungus for a second, and I guess parasites as well. Like this is basically what we would classify all of these things as germs under that umbrella. It's well established in literature that, say, mold, for example, has the capacity to take certain toxic man-made chemicals and convert those into non-toxic organic acids, which can then be put back into the environment and used as a fuel source for other microorganisms or plants. So they can take something that's toxic and poisonous, that is unusable by any other life form, and turn it into food, which basically detoxifies the environment that poison is in. The mold comes along and eats that stuff up. That's very well accepted. It's very well demonstrated in the literature that this actually occurs. But we forget that when it comes to, say, looking at a moldy spot on your bathroom wall, and you walk in there and you go, oh my God, I got some mold there. And yeah, ever since that mold came around, I'm getting sick. And people draw this conclusion. They make this association that it was the mold that was making them sick. So what's really interesting is that there's hundreds, if not thousands, of different toxic man-made chemicals in building material. So in drywall, for example, there's all kinds of stuff. When that material gets wet or damp, it off-gasses those toxic chemicals into the air, and those chemicals aerosolize. Hundreds, sometimes 1,000% greater than what they are when there's no dampness or humidity in the air or in the environment. So people walk into the room, or they've got mold in their house, and they're like, oh yeah, since that mold's there, I know I'm sick. Is it the mold making you sick, or is it the fact that you're breathing in those toxic chemicals? And it just so happens that that mold converts those toxic chemicals into non-toxic chemicals. So the mold is there to do three things. To we can even just simplify it down to two things. To biotransform and to biosequester. So in essence, they are Mother Nature's recycling and waste disposal units. So they're not there to cause the problem. They're actually there to clean it up. And we just see them at the scene of the crime and blame them on our health woes. Now, the symptoms that are associated with mold-related illness are identical to the inhalation of those toxic chemicals that are being off-gassed out of your damp or wet building material. And in human trials, when they've exposed people to those toxic substances, they get those symptoms. They get those health problems. On the flip side, there's only one experiment that's ever been done in the history of humanity where humans have been exposed to black mold in controlled settings. So they basically put people's faces into respirators and blew hundreds of thousands of mold spores into their respiratory tract. And no one got sick. So the evidence as it stands points to the toxic chemicals making people ill and not the mold. Now, the mold might cause illness, but we don't have that data and evidence yet. We've only got associations. And we've also got the data to show that the mold actually cleans up the toxic waste dump. So I think this is a case of wrongfully convicting the mold for a crime that it's not guilty of.
Yeah. Yeah. Sounds like cholesterol. Same kind of thing, right?
The overarching premise here, Lee, this is the same for probably many of the topics we're going to discuss today. We live in a profoundly toxic, sick society. Now, the only way that you can get society to that point where they're accepting of being poisoned and not looking at it and going, hang on a second, we're getting sick from all this toxic building material, or there's poison in our food and our water and whatever, is to use scapegoats and red herrings. And that is blame the mold, blame the bacteria, blame the parasite, blame the inflammation, blame the cholesterol, blame the thyroid hormones, blame your microbiome. Put the blame onto nature. Never look at why nature's behaving that way or why your cholesterol's elevated and what it's actually trying to do. Why is the mold there? Why are the parasites there? Yeah, if when you blame nature, your focus is on those things and it's never on the true cause of the problem. And then when someone comes along and goes, hey, you guys are being poisoned, everyone's like, what are you talking about, you crazy fool? There's mold in my bathroom. So the longer we continue to blame nature, the longer we can continue to poison ourselves. And we just go round and round and round and round in circles ad infinitum. But as soon as we realize that actually no, Mother Nature's trying to help us because we are a part of nature, we're not separate to it. That then draws our attention towards the true causes of the problem. But see, most people don't want to deal with that because it would mean that we'd have to really change the way we do things in our society. We'd have to really clean up our act and take self-responsibility for a lot of these things. But the way it currently stands is, oh, it's just my body. My body just started doing something wrong or for no reason at all. And just the mold's just always there. It's just in nature and it's bound to get me. And the flip side is, no, actually, our environment is very far removed from how it should be, and we're not living the way that we should be. And it's time to clean up our act.
Yeah, and it's not just people not wanting to take responsibility for themselves. It's also the fact that there's lots of money to be made maintaining the status quo, maintaining people being sick, the maintenance of, poisoning people. There's a lot of money in that as well. So it's almost coming from both ends, isn't it? It's top down, but it's also bottom up because, people, as you alluded to, it's difficult. Let's say it's difficult or challenging for people to take their responsibility for their own choices, their own decisions, their own health. Just on that point of, we're talking about fungus and mold in particular, I can imagine some people are listening to this, watching this, and they're going to say, okay, but what about mycotoxins? Surely they cause disease. No? What's your view on that?
So we're told that, and just before we get to that point, I think we hold the power. So we're sort of looking at it this like from bottom up and then top down. I think the balance of power lies in our hands. So if everyone tomorrow went, you know what? I don't want to live in a toxic house anymore. I'm not building my home with toxic materials. I'm not going to give my money to companies that are going to build my house with toxic substances that are going to hurt me and my family. I demand better. I'm going to go with a company that uses natural building material. Like supply and demand. You change the market through supply and demand. So if 100% of the market tomorrow went to natural building companies, the ones who aren't building with non-harmful substances would have to change their ways really quickly or be left behind.
Yeah.
But it's just that we're fearful of making that change. And there's also some resistance there too, because it's more expensive to do that. Because it's sort of like a niche thing at the moment. But if everybody moved across and they realize that, it's your home making you sick, things would change overnight. Same with the food supply. If everyone realized that the way that we're eating, the processed and refined foods is making you sick, and the toxic chemicals that are being sprayed on your food is what's making you sick, and 100% of the even if like we shifted like 20% of the demand tomorrow to farmers producing produce the right way, that would rattle the cage a lot. And the big guys would have to start changing the ways in which they do things to win back some of the market. So I think we do really hold a lot of, we hold far more power than we realize. Yeah,
and that's where education comes in, right? Because people need to be educated more to be able to make those decisions. And, that's why we have podcasts like this, to try and help educate the people that, as you said, we do have the power, but people need to know what those right decisions are for their own health, and to stop making those choices that are actually harming them and start making choices that are going to help them and everybody else as well.
That's right. Now, on the topic of mycotoxins, so there's a couple of different ways of looking at mold as the cause of illness, that we come in contact or we inhale the spores. There's spores everywhere. And quite often, like I've spoken to building biologists and public health specialists on this matter, and quite often they'll find more spores outside of the home than they will inside of the home. And a lot of people go and do things like forest bathing, for example. They'll go out into a forest where there's just mold and fungus everywhere, And you don't hear any reports of people going out and getting mold toxicity when they walk into a forest. So why is that? It's because the food source of what the mold is breaking down matters. So the waste being produced by the mold is dependent on what it's putting in its mouth. So if you're feeding it poison, there are going to be metabolites it is producing that may be toxic to human beings, but you're putting poison in the first place. Think of think of mold like an ice cream making machine. You can make beautiful ice cream with some really high top quality milk and cream and some organic, like natural wild honey, and that's probably all you need, right? Just those 3 ingredients. You put it into an ice cream making machine, and out comes beautiful ice cream. Now, what happens if instead of honey you put cow poo in there? Would you blame the ice cream making machine as the cause of the problem? No, you're going to blame whoever put the cow poo and replaced it for the honey. There was a cow poo that was the problem. The mold is the ice cream making machine. It's just there doing a job. Whatever you put into it, it's going to have certain outputs. If you put poison in, you're going to get poison out. But it does a really good job at converting a lot of those harmful substances into non-toxic substances. Now, that's important in the context of mycotoxins, because they say that mycotoxins can piggyback on the spores. So it's not necessarily the spores that are the problem, but it's the mycotoxins. There's some sort of doubt about this claim as well, because they suggest that mycotoxins aren't volatile, so they can't disperse into the air in any appreciable quantity, certainly not enough to be causing illness in people like what we're seeing. So that's problem number one, is that they're not volatile. The other thing is that the mycotoxins that are produced are dependent on the substrate that the mold is growing on. So there are papers that have put the same type of mold on different substrates, let's say 3 different substrates or food sources. Growth medium, you might call it. And one mold, or that mold growing on one type of substrate, basically produced no mycotoxins. On another substrate, it produced a moderate amount of mycotoxins, but when they analyzed those mycotoxins, they found, they weren't very toxic at all. There was like really low levels of the actual toxic component within that mycotoxin itself. And then when they put it on the third substrate, it was producing heaps of mycotoxins in really high concentrations. And it was quite, a lot of the potent mycotoxin was present in that metabolic waste that was being produced by the fungus or the mold. So it's not the mold. What it's producing is dependent on what it's living on. It's the ice cream making machine.
Yeah.
So
but it's the same as us, isn't it?
Yeah.
Right. Whatever we eat determines the level of toxicity of our bodies, or whatever we consume, whether it's food or the air or whatever. It's no different. Here's one for those of you trying to reclaim your energy, your strength, or just your confidence in your body. Brian was a busy banker who wanted to get fit again, but back pain and a lack of results left him frustrated. He was tired of doing the same gym routines that never really worked, and the pain was making things worse. We changed everything. New program, smarter nutrition, better core stability. He got stronger, dropped the pain, and started getting compliments from friends and family about how good he looked and felt. If you want more than short-term fixes, grab my chronic pain breakthrough blueprint at www.bodycheck.co.uk/free pain guide. You can feel like yourself again, stronger than ever.
Yeah, even think of like your liver. So when you drink alcohol, the alcohol itself is not inherently toxic to the body. When it goes to the liver and the liver's like, okay, we've got to get rid of this, we need to metabolize it, it converts it to acetaldehyde. And the acetaldehyde is the thing that causes damage to the body, which is it's the metabolite of the alcohol. So it goes through the liver and then you get this toxic thing being produced. Same thing with the mold. You put this substance in, it breaks it down and it produces a toxic waste product, which could potentially harm you. But why blame the mold? Are you blaming the liver on the negative health effects of alcohol? No. Blame the alcohol. Blame the input. The inputs matter. So we need to shift our focus and attention away from the mold and start looking at what they're eating. Yeah, because what they're producing, their waste that they're producing is very different inside a home compared to what they're producing on a damp log in the bottom of a forest somewhere. You could have exactly the same types of mold there, and they would be producing two very different kinds of waste. So hopefully that explains the conundrum that we're seeing there a little bit clearer.
Yeah. I wanted to ask that because I know some people are going to be asking that question. So with regards to parasites, so again, it's a similar thing. They're there to, let's say, help with toxins in the body, protecting us from the toxins. But what about, again, people will say, yeah, but to have a parasite is a bad thing because it's robbing us of resources. What would you say to that?
That's a bold claim to say that it's robbing us of sources. What they're likening parasites now to is being a sentinel. So they're the guard at the gate. Now, certainly in animals, what they've found is that animals that have parasites in their gut, when they are exposed to harmful substances like heavy metals, like mercury or lead, for example, the animals that have the parasites in their gut have significantly less heavy metals in their internal organs. They find the heavy metals actually sequestered inside the parasite in the gut. But the animals who don't have the parasites, their internal organs are riddled with this heavy metal. So the parasites are actually there. This one reason why they're there, I'm not saying this is the entire reason, but one reason why they're there is to protect you from exposure to things that you might have been ingesting in your diet or in your water, maybe that you've inhaled or whatever else. Because if you're inhaling stuff, it goes through your blood supply, goes to your liver and gets excreted out in your feces. And that can get reabsorbed in your intestinal tract. So the parasites are there basically to try and keep the stuff in the small intestine, then into the large intestine and move it out in your feces. They're there as sentinels. They're like the bouncer at the nightclub. So don't blame the bouncer at the nightclub for the riffraff. And they also convert heavy metals into non-toxic forms of heavy metals. So they can turn things like mercury into the methylated form. So they're actually converting it into something that when it goes from your body out into nature, it's not going to damage the next organism that it comes in contact with. Have you ever watched a movie called Saving Private Ryan?
Oh, probably a long time ago, so don't ask me to remember what was actually in it.
There's a scene where they're walking through the bush and that the little squad there with Tom Hanks and whatever, they come across an outpost of the enemy and they say, yeah, look, we've got to take this outpost out. And all of his soldiers are going, no, Captain, we can't take these guys out. This is not a part of our objective. Our objective is to go and save Private Ryan. And the captain goes, no, our objective is to win the war. Our objective is to deal with the enemy. They're right there. We've come across them. We've identified them. If we don't deal with them now, they could flank or ambush the next squad that comes through who doesn't see them. So we have to take care of them. So if they didn't take care of them, they just walk off. That enemy squad could attack the next troop that comes through and it could cause a really big problem. It's a similar thing with parasites. The heavy metals come in and the parasites go, right, we are dealing with this now, so that the heavy metals only negatively impact an organism once. Because if the heavy metals went into you and through you and you excreted them and they weren't dealt with adequately, you put them back into the environment and then they eventually make their way into the food supply again or the water supply again. And then the next person becomes exposed to it. So it doesn't impact one person. It could impact 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 10. But your body goes, no, the problem ends here. The mercury comes in, the mercury gets methylated, and then it goes back into the environment, and now it's not a problem anymore. So that the parasites are Mother Nature's cleanup crew. They are there for a reason. They are there for a purpose. If you have parasites and you've got a problem, then wouldn't it stand to reason that you would blame the heavy metals first, deal with the heavy metals or whatever toxins that you're being exposed to first, and then see where the chips fall? I'll give an example that people might be able to relate with a bit better. Our goats made their way onto a neighbor's land a little while ago who was spraying pesticides all over their fruit trees. We don't spray anything here. We're basically organic, biodynamic, whatever you want to call it. And within a week or two, the goats in their feces had all of these parasites, all these worms and stuff just infesting their feces. And I thought, wow, isn't that interesting? That now after eating the poisoned plants, they've got parasites in their gut. And I jump online and I find that some of these worms and things can actually convert toxic substances. I'm not sure if it was specifically the herbicide that they were spraying, but it's like, yeah, maybe the actual parasites took up residence inside my goat's gut to protect them against the herbicides that they'd eaten. And within a week or two after eating the poisoned food, and we'd removed them from the food source, their stools began to normalize and their parasites went away. But if they were continually eating that poisoned plant week in, week out, the parasites would be there and we'd call it a chronic infection. So is the parasite there to deal with the problem and to gobble up the pesticides before it gets into the goat's systemic circulation? Or is the parasite there to basically, it took up residence because the pesticide weakened the goat's immune system, and then the parasites hatched and they're like, yes, we've got a weak host here that we can take advantage of, and now we can make the goat's life a living misery. Like, which situation was it? Or was it a third option that we haven't sort of realized or discussed here? I don't know. But I tend to think that Mother Nature is working for us, not against us.
Yeah, and I guess the next question is, where do they come from?
I don't know.
Because, the other thing, again, if you think about parasites, if we're talking about worms, etc., most people think, well, I go on holiday to somewhere tropical. It comes in via the food supply. I come back home and now I've got, diarrhea or whatever it might be. So what's your view on that?
I don't know. I have a theory. And there is a little bit of evidence to support this theory, but we haven't researched it enough to know for sure. And just before I go into that point, think about your soil. Healthy soil, you've got you've got earthworms and stuff there, right? So why would it be any different for your gut? Why do we look at soil and go, yeah, well, I've got heaps of worms and stuff there. That's beautiful, healthy soil. But I want a completely pristine, sterile gut. I don't want any of these creatures and creepy crawlies and things inside there, because that's going to be causing the problem. Maybe parasites are commensal. They're actually a sign of a healthy ecosystem inside you. Where could these parasites be coming from? They could be coming from the outside. So we might ingest eggs and they hatch inside us when the conditions are right, when there is a food supply available. They also, and this might be met with a bit of resistance by people, but they could also be produced spontaneously from within us. Why do I say that? There is some research that was done in the 20s or 30s from memory, where a bunch of microbiologists took a pure sample of a particular bacteria, grew it under very specific conditions, and then they started to change the conditions of the growth medium that the bacteria were growing in. And then all sorts of different bacteria began to grow. And they also noticed over time that organisms resembling parasites started to grow inside these petri dishes or these culture flasks. Now, the rebuttal against that is that the samples were contaminated, that they weren't pure cultures of bacteria, and somehow something else had been introduced from the outside in. And that explains why they were unable to maintain a pure culture. But this phenomena is called pleomorphism, and it's been demonstrated by the US Department of Agriculture in the 1920s and the 1930s. So there was actually two separate papers with experiments that were performed then, which basically showed that they took one pure sample of bacteria and allowed it to transform into 14 different types of bacteria. And the Russians, the research department of microbiology, I think within a government division somewhere in Russia in the 30s, basically published a paper showing the exact same thing and said, look, pleomorphism has been proven. It's time for microbiology to update its understanding. Let's move forward accordingly. But these findings and similar findings published by dozens, if not hundreds of other scientists throughout the last century have really fallen on deaf ears, because if such a thing occurs, it really throws a big spanner in the works for our current understanding of microbiology. So those parasites may, I don't know if they do, but they may come from within us, depending upon the internal conditions of the gastrointestinal tract.
Yeah, I've heard. Is it Jacob Diaz?
Yeah,
I've heard talk about that. And it's almost like there's like a stem cell almost. I think is it mycozymas or something like that they call it, and they can become whatever's needed.
that's what they say. So we accept that in mainstream microbiology, that we have stem cells that, depending on the conditions within certain tissue, will transform into different cells. So if there's a certain amount of, like a certain pH or a certain food supply or an energy source or a certain temperature or certain hormones or certain inflammatory mediators being exposed to that stem cell, it will direct it to turn into a bone cell or a lung cell or a brain cell or whatever it might be. Now, there's a similar train of thought that actually happens within places like the gut and on your skin, where there's a single base unit that, depending on the needs of that specific location, can allow for a specific bacteria to arise and perform its duties, which is, if it's true, and I don't know if it is, I think much more research needs to be done. But if it is true, then that's really quite a eloquent and intelligent design, because it implies that there's not randomness within the realm of microbiology, that everything is actually growing exactly where it needs to be growing. It's not random, that there's just microorganisms growing willy-nilly and it just happened per chance. It's actually there's some structure and order to this. So if you'd like drop some food on the table and it needs to be broken down by particular bacteria, according to germ theory, that bacteria, wherever it is, say it's like 10 meters that way, it's got to now somehow detect that that food's there. And how does it get there? Does it crawl? Like, it's going to take a long time. Does it become airborne? How does it become airborne? Does it direct itself to that piece of organic material? Or does it just float through and just land there per chance? That's pretty random. If that was the case, I think things breaking down would be a relatively slow, tedious process. Or it would imply that all kinds of bacteria need to exist ubiquitously. That in every little tiny square micron, there needs to be all kinds of different bacteria there, so that when you drop a certain bit of organic matter there, the right bacteria can proliferate to break that thing down. That's a pretty inefficient system, to have every single bacteria everywhere all at once. Or you just have one base unit that is there that can just transform into the right thing at the right time, do its job, and then go back into the base unit and just wait for the next thing to come along, and it will then change its form into the right thing. It's like a multi-tool, right? Whatever job you need to do, you've got the tool on hand. You just change the head on the tool. It's like, yep, got it right here. So that seems like a bit more of a efficient and eloquent system compared to the one that we currently understand. It might be neither of those. It might be the way that germ theory tells us. I don't know. But there's so much evidence out there that casts doubt on the mainstream story, the conventional wisdom that we're told, that it's very hard for me to just accept it blindly now.
Yeah. So it could be, again, going back to parasites, it could be that we do ingest them, particularly if, hydrochloric acid levels are low in the stomach, let's say, and that's, again, part of the theory. It could also be that, they let's just call it, produce themselves when they're needed within the body, or it could be both of those things. And then, as you've alluded to, it might be something else as well.
There's some research that's been done by a group of medical doctors and anthropologists from Duke University. And they went out into the Amazon in the 60s and did research on some tribes there. And they essentially found that in the tribes that had never come in contact with the outside world, there was a complete absence of parasites. They didn't have any parasites at all, even though they were drinking from streams and rivers and lakes and what have you. The parasites only started to come in when the outside world started to encroach in on their territory. Now, is that because they brought in parasite eggs with them? Like the Europeans came in and contaminated the area with parasite eggs? Or was it from mining and logging and deforestation, or bringing in certain chemicals and things which contaminated the air or the waterways, or you brought in processed and refined food, and then the body had to respond to this non-natural food by producing organisms that wouldn't usually reside in your gut to try and break this unnatural, incomplete food down? I don't know. But if that's true, and there are none of these sort of so-called parasites in our guts when we're out there living in nature, I mean, that really puts a big question mark over the whole story we're told about parasites to begin with. And I mean, that's coming from a really reputable source of information. That's from Duke University. So the reason we don't know, Lee, is because we've had a way of viewing this, a very myopic tunnel vision for so long, that all other possibilities are completely off the cards for researchers, because they don't even realize that there are other things that we could, possibilities that we could theorize about, and therefore we don't investigate them. So it is for that reason we have this lack of evidence, but it doesn't necessarily mean that, the lack of evidence doesn't necessarily mean that the other possibilities aren't true. If we went and did the research and we were really open and honest, and we had this inquisitive, we were allowed to inquire openly without being funneled down a specific line of inquiry. We're like, no, you can't research that topic. You have to research this topic and follow the mainstream, and you only get funding if you ask these questions. If we were allowed to do it openly and honestly, maybe we would come across other possibilities. But so far, that's been off the cards since 1890 or whatever, when the germ theory really took hold. So I don't know. I don't know. I don't have a dog in this fight, Lee. I don't care either way. If it's germ theory, if it's terrain theory, if it's none of those and something else, it doesn't matter to me. I just want to know what it is so I can give people the best advice and get people better.
Yeah. Yeah, and I've got the same view. That's why I'm asking you these questions. I don't care what the answer is. I just want to know what the truth is. And just going back to, again, when I did my functional medicine training, I do remember being taught that, if you've got fungal infection, fungal infection or a parasite, there are herbal remedies that you can take. Now, what we were told was, it's not to kill it, it's to change the environment. And then when you change the environment, it's no longer needed to be there. So now I don't know if we were being told that because of legal reasons, so that, we weren't saying, oh, we can kill that parasite with this herb or whatever, or whether it's because even back then they actually realized that it was all about the terrain kind of thing. But I don't know. I don't know what the truth is. I can go back and ask, but that was interesting. So moving on.
Well, that's actually a really important point, Lee. Because you're sort of talking about this idea of natural antiparasitics. I had a parasitic infection. I took wormwood, and then I noticed a whole bunch of worms in my toilet bowl, and then I felt better. Therefore, it was the parasite killing. It was the parasite causing disease, and the wormwood killed the parasite. That's what the problem was. But there is another way of looking at this. So a lot of these herbs come from plants. Wormwood, that plant, they use that plant and many other antiparasitics to clean up mine sites. So when you have a mine and the soil is completely filled with toxic chemicals, they plant, and sometimes even these plants grow themselves in this toxic soil. And what they find is that those plants bioremediate the soil. They absorb up all that toxic sludge out of the soil and then convert it into non-toxic substances, which is then put back into the soil for other microorganisms to use. Now, we've worked out that when we take those particular herbs, we see parasites coming out in our stool. Is the plant killing the parasite, or is the plant acting the same way as it acts in nature, and it's binding up and chelating to all the heavy metals and toxic stuff that's in our gut and removing that from the tissue? So now the parasite's like, oh, I don't have as much of a mess to clean up. I'm not required anymore. I can leave. A lot of these herbs, which are antiparasitic, they upregulate. Again, I don't really know what happens inside a human body. I'm just going off what the mainstream says here, because I don't think we can ever truly know what's going on inside the body. But they say that these herbs upregulate phase 1 and 2 detoxification pathways in the liver. They augment certain enzymes hepatically and renally, so in the kidney and the liver. They stabilize cell membranes. They do all kinds of things. So is it possible that they're binding to heavy metals in the gut? They're upregulating the detoxification processes of the liver. You're now removing all this toxic waste out of your body, and the parasites aren't required anymore. So they pack up shop, close doors, and they evacuate. And we assume, and you feel better. Oh, my symptoms are gone. Yeah, maybe you've got loose stool and digestive symptoms because your body's trying to get rid of a whole bunch of toxic stuff. Your stool's a bit looser. It's bringing more fluid into your bowel to decrease the transit time, so your stool's actually moving through you quicker. So there's less opportunity for that toxic waste inside your gut to be reabsorbed, right? Oh, and as soon as I took the wormwood, all my diarrhea went away. Yeah, it's maybe working via some other mechanism.
Yeah.
And if that is the case, then you have to ask the question, why would we want to focus on therapies that are trying to kill and remove parasites if they are there to protect you? So if you're being exposed to some heavy metals in your environment, and then you come along and take away the parasites with like a drug, which directly kill the parasites, well, now can that heavy metal or that toxic substance get free access into your body and then go into your bloodstream and get deposited in your brain or in your kidney or in your liver or some other vital organ and cause a lot of damage? If that's the case, then you want the parasite to be there. Why do you want to kill it?
Yeah. Yeah. That made me think of another question that would take us on a massive detour, so I'm not gonna go there. So one of the, I guess, foundational frameworks in functional medicine is the 5R protocol. I'm guessing you're familiar with that.
This is like the
I'll go through it because for the audience, I'll need to go through it anyway.
Yep.
So the first R is remove. So that's when you might eliminate, trigger foods like food intolerances and any kind of toxins. Replace is to restore digestive components like enzymes, hydrochloric acid, bile, etc. The third R is re-inoculate. So that's reintroducing beneficial bacteria through probiotics and prebiotics and possibly fermented foods. Fourth R is repair. So heal the gut lining with things like L-glutamine. And then finally rebalance. So things like, supporting everything else with stress management, exercise, mindfulness, etc. So that's the 5 R's. What's your take on its validity and usefulness? Because I know this is definitely being questioned even within functional medicine arenas.
Yeah, I think we know this by a slightly different terminology here. I think some people might be familiar with it as the weed, seed, and feed protocol. Or I think we call it 3 R's here, but 5 R's, yeah, it sounds like exactly the same thing, just by different names. I agree with some of it, and some of it I think we might be a little bit off the mark. So certainly removing the cause or identifying, removing the cause of the problem is very important. So what is the thing causing the issue? Can you identify it? Can you minimize your exposure to it? And then can you support your processes of elimination to get rid of it? I completely agree with that. But when we start talking about re-inoculating good bacteria and trying to balance things out, or we're trying to force the body to do something that it's not currently doing, I question that, because I'm not convinced that the body does anything wrong. So when we see the body doing something, we go, hang on a second, we've got to try and push it to do what we think it should be doing. Maybe we're actually actively working against the body and prolonging that period of time that the person's actually ill for. So I think sometimes we feel like we need to interfere, but maybe the best approach is to actually just remove what the body doesn't need, give it the right nutrition, supply it with the resources that it needs, and then just get out of the way and let it do the rest. That's not going to work in every single situation, but I think as a sort of overarching premise, that's a good thing to do.
Let's take a moment to talk about real-life juggling, because Fred's story might sound familiar. He had wrist, back, and leg pain from years of running and a demanding job and family life. He didn't have time for complicated routines or cookie-cutter advice. So we kept it simple and flexible. Diet, workouts, support, and results. Fred's pain disappeared. His energy came back, and he's now using what he learned to keep building his health on his own terms. If you're busy, burnt out, and in pain, I've got something for you. Download the Chronic Pain Breakthrough Blueprint for free at www.bodycheck.co.uk/free pain guide. You can feel better without turning your life upside down.
We can get into the whole discussion about good and bad bacteria and the microbiome and whatever, because I think like that's a big can of worms, that one.
Yeah, I mean, what I was going to say, what if someone's taken antibiotics for a long period of time? Would you still take the same stance, as in, just eat the right foods and gradually over time your microbiome's going to, rebalance itself?
Well, this is the thing. We're told that our microbiome is separate to us, that it comes from the outside, and that it's not a part of us. I look at it from the viewpoint of the microbiome is you. It is a part of you. Your microbiome, the cells in there, the little bacteria and things, the organisms, are as much of a part of you as your white blood cells. It's just your white blood cells are on the inside, your bacteria is on the outside. It is you. I'm not convinced that you can take bacteria from the outside, put them inside you, and they will take up residence inside you, because they are not a part of you. Like, you can't take someone else's white blood cells and put them inside you and expect their white blood cells to become a part of you. It just won't happen. And there's many reasons why I think that way. And that'd be a very hard thing to demonstrate, to show that, yes, we put this particular bacteria in and it took up residence inside your gut. For all intents and purposes, I think it, from what I understand, those bacteria are transient. So they only flow through you and they don't take up residence. Now, there might be other evidence out there to the contrary, but that's my current understanding. We talk about this concept of bacterial imbalance. So I took some antibiotics and then I got dysbiosis, or then I got a low level of a certain good bacteria and some bad bacteria increased, and now I've got an imbalance. I don't think there's ever an imbalance in the microbiome. I think it's always doing exactly what it needs to do, given the external inputs that we're exposed to. So people talk about a balanced, healthy gut microbiome. What is that? What actually is that? Has it ever been defined? If you go looking, like, so many people just rattle this stuff off. It's like, oh, it's all gut health and it's all dysbiosis and whatever. What does that mean? What is a balanced microbiome? That has never been defined. Nobody has ever defined what that is. Okay, well, what's a dysbiotic microbiome? No one's ever defined it. We have no idea what it is. So it's just these words that get thrown around that have no definition, and they're very arbitrary. So if you don't have a baseline with which to work with, then how do you know when something's imbalanced, and how do you know what you're working towards to rebalance it? It's real.
I think there's something else there as well. So when we're talking about, we're looking at the research. Or is there any research to say that there's an ideal diet for humans?
Yes.
Well, or is it different for different people? Right. So if your family come from Siberia, are you likely to thrive on the same diet as someone that their family comes from Uganda?
So I think the answer is very simple, but living in this society that we're currently in makes it complicated. So the ideal diet for a human being is what is local, what is seasonal, what is fresh, and what is available. But nobody eats that way because we're all so removed from reality. So if you go back like 100, 200, 300 years and you went to every single tribe around the world and asked them what to eat, no one would be confused about what to eat. Everyone would know exactly what it is that is edible. Every single tribe, if you went to someone in Japan and you went to someone in Siberia and you went to someone in the outback of Australia and you went to a Pacific Islander, they'd all have different diets. Why? Because they're all living in different locations. What is available in their environment is different. But they all have those same things in common. It's local, it's seasonal, it's fresh, it's what's available, it's what's edible. So they had worked out through trial and error over many years what didn't kill you. Like, don't eat that purple frog over there because it's going to kill you. Don't eat that yellow berry over there because it's going to basically poison you. What about that red one over there? Yeah, it's good. You can eat that one. What about this brown frog? Yeah, that one's cool. So they'd worked that out. But now we don't eat that way. We're so far removed from how we should be eating that it's very complicated. No one's eating locally. No one's eating seasonally. No one's eating fresh. No one's eating real food. We're all sick and we're all wondering why. So I think the answer to that's very simple, but how do you actually get to that point where we eat the way we're meant to? Well, we've got to make some big societal changes.
But this is my point, right? Can science say there's one right diet for everyone? Can science say there's one right microbiome for everyone?
Yeah, there's not one right microbiome for everyone.
Yeah, that was my point.
So, and
right.
The reason why this is the thing that the whole field of microbiology forgets, is that they think that the bacteria determine your health. The bacteria doesn't determine your health. Your bacteria is a consequence. It is an effect of health. Your bacteria are a consequence of the external inputs. So if you have one person come into the clinic who eats soft drink, chocolate, and chips, and they're sick, and you look at their microbiome, you do a stools test and you go, oh, look at all these bad bacteria in your gut. That's the reason why you're sick. Is it? Or is it the chips and soft drink and chocolate that they're eating making them sick? And when you put that food source into your gut, the bacteria that are really good at digesting those things proliferate in number. So you eat soft drink, chocolate, chips, that stuff gets broken down, goes into your bloodstream, and then it becomes a part of you. So you become what you eat. You're not going to be very healthy if you're trying to build tissue out of soft drink and crisps. Similarly, if you got a person coming in who's healthy and you test their microbiome, you go, oh, look at all these good bacteria. That's the reason why you're healthy. You ask them about their diet. Yeah, I eat some fresh fruit and veg and a bit of red meat and some chicken, and it's all organic, and I cook it myself, and I don't eat chips and chocolate. Yeah. Are they healthy because of the bacteria, or are they healthy because of their dietary habits? And the bacteria that are really good at digesting organic fruit and veg and red meat proliferate in number because they're just there to break that stuff down. And we've confused the microbial profile as the thing that was driving their health. Now, if you get 100 different people coming into a clinic and you test their microbiomes, everyone's microbiome is going to be different. And scientists sitting there going, oh my God, this is so confusing. We just don't understand why. The reason is because they're all eating different stuff. They're all exposed to different amounts of exercise and different sleep patterns, different thought patterns, different things in their water supply. They're breathing in different types of particulate matter. They're doing different amounts of physical activity. They're taking different drugs. They're doing all these different things. And the microbiome responds to those inputs. That is the reason why everyone's microbiome is so individualistic. If you had two identical twins and they did everything the same, they ate exactly the same down to the amount of calories and the amount of protein and fat and carbohydrate and whatever else, and they thought the same and they drank the exact same amount of water and the same amount of physical activity and what have you, their microbiomes would be identical, I think. This is the conundrum that we're in, is because microbiology thinks that it's all random, that the bacteria have come from the outside and they are the thing, they're the driving force behind your health, and they're not.
which leads me really nicely to my next question. What do you think of the classification of bacteria as either commensal, pathobionts, or pathogens?
Yeah, so they essentially believe that there are bacteria that are native to you, that you're exposed to when you're in utero or that when you're born, that take up residence inside you, that have some kind of physiological activity that provides benefit. They are there to produce certain compounds which protect you from outside invaders. They're there to break down certain things that you eat. They're there for a specific reason. Maybe they break down bile salts or whatever. They're there for a reason. They're there to basically benefit you. Or they think some of these things have no real role at all. They're just sort of hanging around. They're not really good. They're not really bad. Or that there's some bad guys and that their sole purpose in life is to invade you and come and make your life a misery. I don't think that's the case at all. I think every bacteria is exactly where it needs to be at any given time. That they are all there for a reason. They're neither good nor bad. What they are trying to do is to maintain or reestablish a form of homeostasis inside your body. That is what they're there to do. So you wouldn't look at a white blood cell and go, you see that white blood cell there? That's a bad one, and that one over there is a good one. Well, we don't think that way at all. They're just there to do a role. But the reason why I think a lot of this has happened is because when people get ill, we see certain bacteria increasing in number, and that correlates alongside the induction of symptoms. So someone gets sick and we see a bacteria there and we go, well, that one must be bad. And we also see a reduction in those other ones that were elevated when they were healthy, so they must be the good ones. And now we've got this increase in the bad guys and the decrease in the good guys, and now there's a problem. But you have to ask the reason why they changed. So there was a really interesting experiment that was done in some milk. They took some milk and there was some mercury in the milk, and they took some tissue samples from people's guts and they put it in the milk, and they identified, I think, 24 strains of certain bacteria in these tissue samples that they put into the milk. So in the milk that didn't have any mercury, they put it in, it was 24 strains. In the milk that did have the mercury in it, they put it in, and they went, oh, hang on a second, there's 26 strains in here. Where did those 2 strains come from? Oh, it must have been contaminated. But what they found was that those 2 strains, and they were E. coli strains, just so happened to be really good at breaking down mercury. So if you have some mercury in your water or in your food, and then you start getting sick, and you do it, say you've done a stool test before you drank the mercury-laden water, and you don't see this particular form of E. coli in your gut, then you do drink the mercury and you get symptoms, and you do the test and you go, oh, see, there's these 2 new strains of E. coli in my gut, and they only came after I started getting the symptoms. Well, they must have been the problem. Were they? Or did your body respond in an attempt to try and regain balance and clear out that mercury by increasing the number of these 2 strains of E. coli that are really good at breaking down mercury? And when they're breaking down that mercury, there's waste being produced, and your body is trying to flush all of that stuff out of it. So now you're getting loose, you're getting more water brought into your bowel. The stool's flowing through faster. Oh, I'm getting cramping and gurgling and diarrhea and bloating because my food's working its way through faster and it can't be broken down as much. So now I'm getting gas produced. I got all these gut symptoms. And I know it was the bad bacteria because I did the test before and after, right? I think we've just confused cause and effect. And what we've done is we blamed the police for the crime. We blamed the firemen for the fire. It's time to make a bit of a reevaluation on this idea of so-called good and bad bacteria.
I guess it's the same thing when we look at, lipopolysaccharides. Again, they're often blamed for causing inflammation in the body, possibly chronic systemic inflammation in the body, and therefore that can cause symptoms, illness, etc. But it's the same as what we've just been saying, or what you've been saying, is that, again, it's a sign that your body's doing the right thing to deal with some negative aspect that's already happening in the body.
Yeah, exactly. It's all there for a reason. Even the inflammation. Yeah, even the so-called LPS, the lipopolysaccharides, where we are blaming the body for a man-made problem. Like essentially, inflammation is the healing process, and we've confused it as the cause of the problem. Oh, I got some pain. All right, go and do a biopsy. Well, there's all this tissue damage there, and look at all these white blood cells. They must have been the cause of the problem. No, the tissue damage happened first. The inflammation is the healing response. So, of course, when you get damaged tissue acutely, you're going to get an acute healing response, which is acute inflammation. So you go and stub your toe against the door. Ouch. Now I get an inflammatory response. Or you get a splinter in your finger. Oof. You get the inflammatory response because it's the antidote to the splinter. It is the body trying to get that splinter out. But if you keep getting a splinter today and then tomorrow and the next day and the day after and the day after, it's going to always be inflamed. We would call that chronic inflammation. But the tissue damage happened first. The splinter was the cause. The inflammation is the consequence. So this is the same thing in the body. We understand that when it comes to a stubbed toe. I'm chronically stubbing my toe. I've got a chronic healing response. I've got chronic inflammation. Chronic splinters, chronic inflammation. We understand it in that context. But when it's like, oh, I've got chronic inflammation in my gut. I've got chronic inflammation in my liver. Or I've got chronic inflammation in my muscles. Yeah, you're in a chronic state of healing. Why? What is causing the damage to the tissue? Is it the cigarettes you're smoking? Is it the alcohol you're drinking? Is it the processed and refined food that you're eating? Is it the particulate matter in the air? Is it, God knows what. There's so many things that we're exposed to, right? But we should be looking at the splinter, not at the effect to the body, or not the body's response to the splinter. But this sort of wraps back to that red herring and what was the other thing? Yeah, it's the red herring fallacy, where you're trying to draw the attention away from the true cause of the problem, so that we don't pay attention to that. Because if we knew that it was the food making us sick, well, then people want a better, healthier food supply. But when you just blame the chronic inflammation in the gut, well, now we just focus there rather than what we're doing outside in the farms.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a bit like, the first aid protocol, RICE, rest, ice, compression, elevation. And a lot of people are starting to question that now and say, well, hang on a minute, that's the natural healing process. When you've got tissue damage, you've got inflammation, swelling, pain, redness, right? That's the healing process. So why would you want to cool the area, and why would you want to compress it? All you're doing is slowing down the healing process. So recently, got a bit of knee pain from playing tennis. I've been doing red light therapy, infrared sauna. I've been using heat to increase the healing process, and it's worked really well. Initially for the first week, I did use a bit of ice, but that was more pain relief. But after the first few days, it was just all heat, right? You're just speeding up that healing process.
Yeah, you're working with the body rather than against it.
Yeah, and it's interesting, and I watch a fair bit of sport, and even now you see someone, they get injured on the field, they come off, and you just see this ice scratch their leg, and you just think, they've got all this money, they've got all the latest science, but yet they're still, slowing down the healing process of, a player that's worth millions and millions of pounds or dollars or whatever, which is quite interesting.
And if you get that acute injury occurrence and the body goes, right, we're going to activate an inflammatory response and it's going to take 5 days to heal it. But then you come in and blunt that response with ice and you compress it and you prevent blood flow and you take an anti-inflammatory, so you basically stop the healing process in its tracks and you blunt that response to 5% of what it was. Do you now draw that healing response from 5 days out to 30 days? And then after 10 days, you go, man, this thing should have healed by now. It should have only taken 5 days. And now you're at 15 days and you go, oh, it's still not right. And you go to your doctor and they say, yeah, see, there's all this inflammation. That shouldn't be here. That should have been gone at day 5. Well, it's the chronic inflammation that's the problem. No, it's not. You blunted the healing response and now the body is trying to make up for that blunting effect that we did with the rice protocol and taking analgesic and anti-inflammatory drugs. So we basically just worked against ourselves. And then what do? We blame the body. It's the inflammation's fault. It's really quite absurd.
A thing that I think is still pushed heavily, in naturopathy, functional medicine, nutritional therapy, is how important fiber is for gut health. And it seems to me, the research that I'm aware of, there seems to be a lot of research to say, yeah, there's so much benefit in terms of the gut microbiome and diversity and health when it comes to, making sure you've got enough fiber in the diet. What's your view on that? Do you have a view on that?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. The mainstream wisdom on this is that the fiber breaks down into short-chain fatty acids. And that those short-chain fatty acids then act as anti-inflammatories or anti-cancer substances in the body. But is that really what's going on? I don't know. How are they working as an anti-inflammatory? Is that fiber binding to certain things in your gut and acting like a broom and taking stuff out? Maybe it is. Maybe it's working some other way. How is it working as an anti-cancer agent? I don't know. I mean, I don't even know if you want to go down the whole cancer rabbit hole, but how is that fiber actually working the way it's meant to work? The major issue I have, Lee, with any of these claims about specific substances in a food is that nobody eats that specific substance by itself. No one sits there and just eats a tub of just pure fiber. You don't find that in nature. No one sits there and just eats a tub of pure fat. I just get a tablespoon. I'm just eating pure fat. It's just these chains of fatty acids. No one's eating that way. No one's eating just amino acids. We eat food. So fiber is found in plants. And inside a plant is, who knows, thousands of different substances and chemicals and things. So how are all of those things interacting in that food together inside the food? Who knows? How are all of those things then interacting when you ingest them inside your body? Who knows? This is the concept of food synergy. And nutrition basically says we will never know. But what they do is that they take some food, they mess with it, they say they isolate just the fiber, which I think is a major problem. I don't think that is actually what's going on. And then they give it to an animal and they see an effect and they go, see, when you eat the food that has the fiber in it, this is what it does. How do you know that? You've isolated one thing, you've given it, but now when the animal or the person eats the food, they're also ingesting 999 other things alongside it. So what are all the interactions that are going on there with that fiber that's been studied? When you eat more fiber, maybe you feel less hungry. Well, now I don't feel as hungry. So then you're not going to go and eat the chips and the ice cream. Is that one of the reasons why there's some effects that are observed? Maybe. Maybe it's that there's polyphenols and flavonoids and various other substances in foods that contain fibers, and they're also having effects. I mean, I think it's so difficult to know, and this is one of the main issues I have with the field of nutrition now, is that they have tried to basically mechanize it. They've tried to take this reductionistic approach towards nutrition that I don't think can be done. I don't think you can ever know what's truly inside a food. What's in a lemon, what's in a lime, what's in a bean, what's in whatever. All we can safely say is that a lime is a lime. What's in there? Who knows? I can eat a lime and see an observed effect, so I can start drawing some associations or correlations there. But then I think all that happens is that people make up or invent stories about the effects that they see, and whether or not there's any truth to those stories is, something that we need to think about. Another reason why this is also complicated is that we adulterate our food supply. So when you grow crops and you eat a bean or a grain or a legume or a berry or some lettuce, you're not just getting the lettuce or the grain or whatever. There's also lots of contaminants in the soil. There's heavy metals from machinery making its way into the soil, which is then contaminating the plants. We sprayed 300 billion kilograms of pesticides on our food last year. We're putting in synthetic fertilizers. We're putting hormones and things onto like plant growth regulators and all of these different things. We're harvesting oranges in California and sending them 10,000 kilometers down to Sydney in Australia. Like, there's so many things that have disrupted that normal food from what it actually should be, that when you eat it and you get an effect and you say, well, it was the fiber that did it, or it was this that did it, how do you know? Because there was heavy metals in it, there was synthetic fertilizer in it, there was hormones in it, there was pesticides in it. What was having the effect? It's enough to send anybody insane. We don't know.
Let me share Simon's story because I think a lot of gym goers and desk workers alike will get this. Simon was lifting heavy at the gym with poor form, and it caught up with him. His back pain got so bad he couldn't sit, stand, or even concentrate at work. He felt stuck physically and mentally. After we assessed and rebuilt his foundation, Simon was not only pain-free, but stronger than before. His back lifting, more productive at work, and more importantly, happier in his everyday life. If pain is affecting your workouts and your quality of life, don't wait. Download the Chronic Pain Breakthrough Blueprint today at www.bodycheck.co.uk/free pain guide. Let's help you feel strong and capable again. The reason why I guess I've become curious about that is because I've seen so many people with, for instance, autoimmune conditions, that they completely cut vegetables out of their diet and their health massively improves. So then you think, so how is fiber the golden goose, so to speak, when these people are clearly massively improving their quality of life? And, I do hear the argument, yeah, but if you give it long enough, carnivores are going to have problems. Now, I guess we're in that time where we probably haven't had people being carnivore long enough to really make that decision. And, I've spoken to people on this podcast that have been carnivore for over a decade. And yet you look at them and you think they look really healthy. They look way younger than they actually are, but they haven't touched any fibre for over a decade. So my mind starts questioning, well, how important really is it if some people are clearly more healthy than they were when they were eating it?
Well, here's the thing, Lee. We have direct observed evidence of people free from disease, all disease, who were eating plants and animals. We have that evidence. So we know it's not the food that's the cause of the problem. It's what we're doing to it. Because if you go to any of that anthropological evidence and those papers where they sent those medical teams, like some of them, they lived with these natives for 14, 15 years. And they saw no disease, and they're eating root veggies and berries, and they're eating grains, and they're eating snakes and birds and freaking turtles and like everything. They're eating leafy greens. Like it's all a part of their diet. No one was sick. So to me, that says it's not the food. It's what we're doing to it. It's the amount of food miles that we're putting on it. It's how's it being harvested? How's it being stored? It's being put in cold refrigeration for 6 months and put on a ship and then sent halfway around the world. And then you put it into some plastic wrap and you stick it on a shelf. Like there's so many other things that are being done to the food, along with growing it in soil that's been raped and pillaged. We're putting synthetic fertilizers and hormones on it. I mean, I don't think we can blame the food. Now, what I think might happen when people get better on, say, carnivore, for example, is if they were eating food, like poisoned food that was, so if you look at some of those fruits and veggies, like they're some of the most heavily sprayed produce on the planet. 300 billion kilos of pesticides were sprayed on our food last year. That's enough for like 400 kilograms per person. So, like, for me, I think maybe we should look at that first, and then if there's any stuff, like residual stuff hanging around after we've cleaned up the food supply and the way that we're growing food, then we can start looking at various compounds in the food. But like by all accounts, those guys living in nature who are eating what was available, there was no disease, there was no illness, there was nothing. I don't know if I can share my screen.
Yeah, should be able to.
I'll just show you just really quickly. Just like two of the papers. That one and this one. Yeah, I've got two papers here, right? This is the way I answer a lot of questions, Lee. You know, people sort of have this argument about, are we carnivores? Are we herbivores? Are we fruitarians? If you want to know what an animal eats, go out into nature and observe it, and you'll find out what its diet is. Like, how do you know what a panda eats? Go and look at it in nature. How do you know what an elephant eats? Go and observe it in nature. How do you know what a human being eats? Go and observe them in nature. That's been done. We know that they eat what's available. I don't think there were many or any reported cases of people just eating meat or just eating plants. Like even the Eskimos, for example, when they killed the caribou, they would consider it a delicacy to open the stomach of the caribou and eat the contents from it, which was all the plant material. So like they weren't pure carnivore. Yeah, let me share my screen.
There we go.
Is that sharing?
Yep.
Okay, so there's many of these papers that have been published in the literature. I'm just going to show two because these are just ones I've been looking at recently. But this was of a group of medical doctors headed up by Roberto Baruzzi and Leccio Franco, published
Can you enlarge that bit?
Oh, this one?
Dan? Yeah, just so it's a bit easier to see. There we go.
So they went and lived with the Xingu people of Brazil for 14, 15 years. And they had a number of tribes that they were looking at. It was about 1,880 people. And they did all the medical assessments on them over that period of time. And if you go through, they looked at hypertension. They didn't find a single person with blood pressure issues. And they analysed 282 males and 245 females. There was not a single person who was obese or overweight of those people that they examined. There was not a single case of diabetes. There was not a single case of a person with elevated cholesterol or elevated triglycerides. There was not a single person with cardiovascular disease. Not a single person with ischemic heart disease. No one had stroke. And even when they got there, they didn't find any evidence of people with a history of stroke. No one had peripheral vascular disease, no varicose veins, no varicocele, no gastrointestinal disorders. So no duodenal ulcer, hiatus hernia, appendicitis, or diverticular disease. No hemorrhoids. And in that 15 years from 1965 to 1979, they found 4 cases of cancer in those 1,880 people. So 2 of those cases were skin cancer. 1 was testicular cancer in a 4-year-old child, and the other was a gynecological cancer. So those people were, when I say they're free from disease, like I quite literally mean that they couldn't find evidence of disease in those people. And then there was this paper here. This was headed up by by Duke University, where they went.
And if you could just enlarge that a little bit, Dan.
Oh, sorry. So this was done by Duke University. There was a guy called Dr. James Yost, who was an anthropologist who lived with the Warani tribe for, I think, it was a number of years, many years, I can't remember now, but it was quite some time, like 5, 6 years. And then the medical team from Duke came over and spent 4 weeks doing all of the medical examinations on these tribes people. So I think from memory, there was about 600 of the people in the Warani tribe that were examined. And sorry, no, it was about half that. So 147 males and 146 females, representing about 60% of the population. So the physical examinations, it says, except for a few individuals representing fewer than 5% of the population sampled, the people were very robust and appeared in excellent health without evidence of malnutrition. They had no eye problems. The only eye problems they could find were from traumas, so they'd obviously had an injury. They had perfect color vision. There was no deafness. There was no issues with their nose or throat. Their taste was essentially normal. No thyroid issues, no hyper or hypothyroidism. Respiratory problems, there was none apart from pneumonia in 2 older women. No cardiovascular disease. They found no abdominal issues apart from 1 individual who had a non-tender 2-centimeter right inguinal mass. No other abnormalities were found in any of the people. They found 1 person with polydactyly, so that's like 6 fingers or 6 digits. Everything else they basically found was secondary to trauma or it was congenital. They found no skin issues apart from scabies in a few children. Neuropsychiatric problems, they found no problems apart from people who'd acquired head injuries. And I think there was 1 person that had Down syndrome. They were born to an elderly mother. And yeah, I mean, it goes on. So all that data's there. I mean, they went and they looked at the health of these people, and they just couldn't find anything wrong with them. Yet they were all eating fruit, vegetables, nuts, seeds, grains, whatever. So that, to me, that really puts a big question mark over the people who claim that we are fruitarians, that we should only be eating fruit, or we should only be eating plants, or no, don't eat plants because they're out to kill you, only eat meat. Well, how come these guys weren't sick if things in plants or things in meat are the cause of the problem?
Yeah, and Weston A. Price also, did a lot of research, well, about 100 years ago now, and it said exactly the same. Wherever he went, native tribes ate locally sourced natural foods, and their health was pretty much perfect. But if they then visited a family member who had become industrialized, a little bit further away, and they had teeth problems, they had malocclusion, their teeth were falling out, they didn't grow properly, they had all kinds of disease.
This is a sleight of hand trick. This is a sleight of hand trick to keep society focused away from the problem. That is the only reason that we've ended up where we are. Because if we understood that disease is a consequence of modern living, disease is a consequence of living in opposition to nature, you can only be as healthy as the environment that you live in. If people were aware of that, would they accept companies that come out and build homes out of toxic material? Would they accept the automotive industry who's basically creating vehicles out of toxic substances, and then when those engines run, they pump more toxic substances into the air, and there's tire dust and brake dust and what have you? Would they accept the adulteration of their food supply? Would they accept the wearing of synthetic clothing that has toxic chemicals in it? Would they accept the personal care industry that basically sees women and men lathering their skins in toxic chemicals 2-3 times a day? Like, no one would accept it. So we wouldn't be able to get to this position where we are now in modern society, where we have all of these things. But now that we do have this way of living, and people are so accustomed to it, when you draw attention to this problem, it's like, oh, that's too much of an issue to deal with now. We're too far gone. We can't go back to living like cavemen. And that's not what I'm saying. I don't think we need to. I think we just need to really, we could do some really basic, simple things that could have profound effects on the health of the population that wouldn't see us having to go back to living like cavemen. And that could be just making our dwellings out of natural material. It could be learning how to grow food again the way that it's meant to be grown, without poisons and herbicides and fungicides and whatever. It could be wearing natural fibers. It could be making personal care products out of plants. There's a lot of natural ways to make those things. It could be making sure that we're getting access to good quality water. It could be that there are grants and things put in place by the powers that be that give people access to land and they can grow their own food. It could be that we put huge subsidies onto food that is grown regeneratively or through permaculture principles, so that the farmers growing the food the right way get incentivized, and then the food that is grown by them is massively subsidized, and we put huge taxes on all the junk and stuff. Just really simple things that we could do that aren't done. And because they're not done, we get sicker and sicker and sicker and sicker. And then the professions are all sitting around the table scratching their heads going, why is everyone so sick? We don't know. It must be a germ. It must be inflammation. It must be the lignins in the food. It must be the lectins in the plants. It must be the saturated fat in the eggs. It's it's crazy when you think about what we're doing.
Yeah. Yeah. Moving on, got a couple more questions for you. So a lot of practitioners heavily rely on lab testing for, let's call it, diagnosis. So whether it's stool testing, blood, hair, urine, and they're used quite heavily to decide on what the approach or protocol is going to be. I definitely think a lot of practitioners rely too heavily on testing. And certainly my original training back in 2007, 2008, one thing that was really drummed into us is that you don't treat a lab result. You look at the whole person, you look for clinical correlations. And I've definitely felt a lot of benefit from using lab tests, but I'm very, how can I put the word? I'm very reluctant to overly test people. I only test if I feel the real need, and I certainly try to get what we call in the check system the foundation factors in place first. So get someone thinking right, breathing right, drinking right, eating right, moving right, sleeping right first. Let's get all that in place first. If there's still some kind of stumbling block, okay, then maybe we need to investigate further. That's been my approach for the last sort of 17 years. Even though we were encouraged, when someone comes to see you, you run all of these tests. That's never sat well with me, because I don't want to waste people's money, right? Because, and again, quite often I might get someone to do one test. It might be 2, it might be 3, sometimes 4, but that's very rare. What's your view generally on testing?
My view is unless it's going to change the course in which you treat somebody, then don't do it. But yeah, I guess if you do all the things and you're still stuck, then maybe there might be some use for it. But we have to be very careful with a lot of these tests, Lee, because we're not interpreting them correctly. And a lot of them are unvalidated. Like, think about microbiome testing. That's nonsense, because you haven't got a gold standard by which to work by. You go and do a $600 microbiome stool test, and someone says, oh, the reason why you're sick is you've got dysbiosis. A, you have to demonstrate that dysbiosis causes disease, and that has never been done. B, you have to demonstrate what a balanced microbiome is so that you know what you're trying to achieve, and that has never been defined. And C, no one knows the things that you need to do to increase or decrease certain strains of so-called good and bad bacteria. So what are you actually, what treatment are you using? Yeah, so that's just one example. Like, microbiome testing is pretty low-hanging fruit. But I mean, think about like cholesterol. If you're through what lens are you looking at the results of that test? You see elevated cholesterol. Well, cholesterol's the bad guy. Is it? Or is it actually there for a reason? If it's elevated, maybe it might be there to protect the arteries and the blood vessels against something that you're being exposed to that's going into your blood, which is damaging your vessels of your circulatory system. And the body's now lining the blood vessels with cholesterol to protect itself. And you come along and go, oh my God, this cholesterol, I've done the test, it's high, cholesterol's bad, let's get it down. Why would you want to do that? You strip away the cholesterol, you're taking away the body's protective mechanism, and you're adding fuel to the fire. So you have to be very careful about it. You've really got to know what you're doing. And I mean, I taught this stuff for years. I was doing courses and all sorts of things on interpreting functional pathology tests. And I haven't run a test now in years, because I think it's really not necessary. And I don't really know what a lot of these results actually mean. And I don't think the body does anything wrong. I don't think you can look at a lot of these tests of a marker of something in the body that is native to the body and say, well, that's a problem. Sure, if it's like you do some urine sampling for the presence of organophosphates, or maybe you do some testing for like the presence of mercury in some tissue or something. Yeah, okay, that sort of makes sense. But if we're testing biomarkers of like inflammatory mediators, or we're testing for levels of hormones, I mean, that's another one. I don't think hormones are ever out of balance. I think the body's responding to an external input and it's trying to regain balance and it's increasing and decreasing levels of certain hormones in an effort to get there. But if we go, oh my God, your progesterone's high, I need to get it down, maybe you're working against the body. Now, the other thing that I think is really important too is that sometimes when you do something with the client and they start to feel better, and then you do a test, and then the results of the test come back and they're not moving the way that you wanted to see it moving. Even though the client's feeling better, you might then second guess what you're doing and change your approach, which could then basically set you back. It then puts you on the wrong path because you get scared. You go, oh my God, this level's increasing and I was doing this thing. Oh, I shouldn't be doing it. But you're feeling better, right? Yeah, I'm feeling better. Oh, no, this marker's going up. Let's stop doing it. So you take the client off this path of the road to healing, and maybe we're confusing the body's healing response when we're looking at these markers as a potential issue or problem, and then second guessing our approach to their healthcare. So yeah, there's a lot to this.
Do you know, Dan, what's interesting? I've been working with someone. I won't go into the details. I don't want to, cross any confidentiality issues, but I've been working with someone for a while, and this person's feeling better. They're feeling better. They're constantly feeling better and better and better. Then they have to go in for, let's just say, a medical check, right? I'm not going to give too much detail away. They have this medical procedure to check that what they used to have hasn't come back. They come out of hospital and their body's just gone into chaos. And now they're saying, oh, I wish I hadn't gone in for this test, and now it's flagged up all these things that are wrong with me. But the person was feeling 100% better than, 9 months ago. And one of the things I think I've experienced, certainly in recent years as well, what we hear a lot from the medical community is, we've got to find it early, we've got to find it early, we've got to find it early. And what that means to me is, we need to make money out of you sooner. We need to make money out of you sooner. We need to make money out of you sooner, because the more we test, the more we're going to find something that according to our standards is abnormal, and therefore we've got to give you a treatment for that thing, whether you feel unwell or not. And I almost see testing can definitely cause more harm than good.
You have to be so careful. And how does this all play into the placebo and nocebo effect as well, Lee? So I remember reading a paper, I think it was like a Swedish or Norwegian study that was done in women. It's like 600,000 women, I think. It was done over quite a number of years, who had breast cancer. Now, the women who had like the initial scan done that found the nodule or whatever it was and had nothing else done had a much higher rate of spontaneous remission than women who went in and had one additional or more scans or investigations done. So the women who found it, like, right, it's there, and did nothing else, their rates of spontaneous remission after 5 years were far greater. So if you start going in there and then you start testing and you're looking deeper and deeper and you're trying to find this thing, is it causing stress and worry in people? It's like, oh, now it's really bad. Now it's gone here. And what is that doing on a psychological level? Is that driving some of the disease? If you go in to your doctor, this is basically why I've stopped having scans and things done. I used to get freaking so many things done back even like 10 years ago, because I was like, no, I want to be on top of everything. I just want to make sure I get an abdominal ultrasound and get them to have a look and whatever. And I'll stop doing all that stuff now, because just say they found a little thing somewhere. There's a little nodule here. You better keep an eye on that. And then I go home and go, oh my God, I've got a nodule on my liver. Oh no, is this? And I start worrying about it. What impact does that have on my health? Is that nodule anything, or is it nothing? If you go and look at the rates of misdiagnosis to do with things like cancer It's astronomical. There are rates as high as 60% plus in some populations who are misdiagnosed. So what that means is they either were told they had cancer and they didn't, or they didn't have cancer and they were told they did. And how they worked out this misdiagnosis rate is essentially at autopsy. So when the person died and they opened them up and like, right, we told them they had XYZ cancer. Oh, shit, there's nothing here. Whoops. Or, well, we told them they were fine. Oh my God, look at this huge mass in their abdomen. We didn't know it was here. Now, if you compare that to the rates of misdiagnosis going back to about 1910, 1920, they're about the same. And there's actually papers that talk about this that say our precision and our accuracy in diagnosing through these scans and tests has not increased in 100 years, yet we're told that it's so much better than it ever was. So, I mean, you really have to ask the question: is it good to be doing these things just as routine, or should we really reserve it for those sort of really necessary cases?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think going back to the more functional testing, from what you were saying, when you get it, let's say it's a stool test, and let's say you've got some E. coli coming up on the test, I guess the benefit you could potentially get from that is not the E. coli is the problem, but again, based on what we said earlier, does that give you now an idea of what might be the problem? So, for instance, could it be a toxic issue that's causing that? So then you might say, right, well, we could potentially investigate what toxin that could potentially be, or we could run, heavy metal detox or whatever it might be. So again, that's why I said at the beginning, I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but I guess in those kind of tests, it's intelligently using the results that you get rather than that reductionist approach of, oh, E. coli, we need to, that's the cause, let's go and kill the E. coli.
Yeah, and I mean, there's so many other things going on in the body at any one point in time. So why do we think that we can just do one test and we see one marker out of range? We go, oh, that's it. Well, you haven't done all the different tests that are available. If you did all the hundreds of tests that were available, you'd see all sorts of stuff. So then your sort of approach to the healthcare is biased by the results of that one test. If you went and did another test, maybe you'd see a different marker. Would that then change how you treat them? Right? So then why are we basing our treatment on that one test? Like, I don't know. I guess you could use them judiciously. I don't really do it like that anymore. I sort of just, I say to the person, here's a list of 10 things the human body needs to thrive and survive. How many of those things are you doing? Here's a checklist. Oh, I'm only ticking 4 of those things. All right, there's 6 things that you need to do. Let's put in a plan to modify your diet and lifestyle over the next however long to get you doing all of these things, and then let's see how you're going. And then when the person comes back after a month or 2 months or whatever, how are you feeling? Oh, way better. Oh, cool. Okay, so we don't have to worry about the test. But I think a lot of what happens now is that clinicians have forgotten about those basic principles, and they go straight for the testing, and they miss all of the foundational stuff, which is the important stuff.
Yeah.
And they can't see the forest for the trees. They get blindsided by these tests. And particularly in the natural medicine industry, they have been led so far astray now to think that that's what they need to do as an evidence-based practitioner, that they're not doing their job properly and they're not doing their due diligence and the duty of care right by the client if they're not doing these functional, expensive tests, that it just becomes second nature. And then what they do is that they start prescribing and informing their treatment based upon the results of said test. So Yeah, there's many sort of things that need to be considered in broader context with testing. If people want to do it, fine, but just make sure, as you said, you're getting all those foundations ticked off first. And if there's some residual stuff left over and you're really struggling, then yeah, maybe some judicious testing would be worthwhile.
Do you know, I actually remember once doing a test, and I spoke to the lab themselves about my test results. And at the end of the call, the person said, "Oh, I hope you feel better soon." And I thought, I feel fantastic. I was thinking, what are you talking about? Because what she done? She looked at the test results and assumed that I'm in really bad shape, when actually I was in really good shape. But she's looked at my test results and thought, oh, obviously he's not doing well, and obviously didn't listen to what I was saying, because I didn't have any symptoms.
Well, I've seen this so much over the years too, Lee. Doing all these like gut microbiome tests and seeing all sorts of so-called pathogenic bacteria or parasites or whatever in people's guts, and you start to question them about their health and well-being, and it's perfect. So why would I then go and start trying to get rid of said pathogen out of their body if their gut function is perfect and normal? It really sort of defies all logic. And, you know, if you go looking hard enough, you will find something. So how hard do you want to look? And I guarantee that if like 95% of people that come through the door of the clinic aren't doing all the things that a human being needs to be doing to maintain and achieve good health.
I think you're being generous when you say 95%.
Yeah.
or pessimistic, I should say.
Yeah.
I think it's closer to 100%.
Yeah. There's very few people out there who are doing all the things all the time. So we've got a long way to go, but this is sort of the corruption of the natural medicine industry, really, because once upon a time we didn't have access to any of these tests, and we didn't have access to any of these fancy vitamin pills and things, and the way in which we treated people was with those natural principles. We looked at the body holistically. We understood that there were certain things the body needed. Are you getting it? No, you're not. Okay, here's the plan. The curriculum's already written. We know what needs to be done. The doctor is just the teacher. We're just there to identify what it is you're lacking and what you need, and to gently guide you along your way back to good health. But now that wisdom's been lost, and we're looking at it from the guise of, oh my God, health's really complicated. No one knows what's going on. Is it a germ? Is it a gene? Is it bad luck? Is it inflammation? Who knows? We don't know what causes disease. We don't know what the human body needs. Oh, this is all a big mystery. We're never going to get to the bottom of it. And then we think we need all these fancy, fandangled, expensive interventions to try and manage symptoms for people. And it's just completely backwards from how we used to be doing things not so long ago.
Yeah. So one more question for you. We've kind of touched on it a little bit, but I think it's an interesting question to ask. So many practitioners recommend antimicrobials of some sort. It might be herbal. Obviously, medical doctors use pharmaceutical products. There's even natural antivirals. Be quite interested to get your view on that one. What would you say to practitioners that are using those kind of products with their clients, particularly for chronic conditions?
Well, sometimes we see effects from patients taking these substances, but the effects of the treatment don't necessarily inform us what the cause was. Now, for example, we have a lot of herbal antibiotics or antiparasitics or anti-inflammatories or antivirals. Are they working by killing off the microbe? Are they working by suppressing or getting rid of the inflammation? Or are they supporting the body's innate physiological responses to push them through the healing response more rapidly? or to help it detoxify from whatever the thing it's been exposed to? Or is it there to stabilize some of the tissue? Is it there to act as a nutrient? Like, is it working some other way and we're just seeing a result and then allowing that information to confirm the story that we've told ourselves about what the cause was, right? Person had dysbiosis. I gave them oregano oil. They got better. Therefore, it was a bacterial overgrowth. Was it? Was it something else? So yeah, I think these things can be useful. They can be beneficial, but I'm not sure that they're actually necessarily working the way in which we think they're working. Like take turmeric, for example, for inflammation. Just because you take turmeric and the person's injury gets better doesn't mean the inflammation was the cause of the problem. Like we believe that turmeric can stabilize cell membranes. It can actually go in and start to reduce oxidative stress within tissue. It can help to act as a chelator and remove waste from the tissue. It can increase various metabolic processes in the liver. So it's assisting. It's basically guiding or pushing the body through. It's augmenting that healing response and reducing it down in time or duration or length so that you come out the other side quicker. And your symptoms may not be as bad because it's taking away some of that metabolic waste, so the body doesn't have to do it as much by itself, and it's not sort of got the pedal to the metal, so to speak. It can take its foot off the accelerator a little bit more, and we don't see as many symptoms. So yeah, I think these things can certainly help, but yeah, I'm not convinced that the effect necessarily confirms the story that we're told.
So that kind of comes back to what I was saying earlier, is that, I've helped a lot of people over the years, but perhaps the mechanism that helps them wasn't what I thought it was. So the approach may have been correct, but how I think they got better is probably different from what I believed at the time.
The other really interesting thing is, Lee, that we don't consider the effect of the placebo or the nocebo when it comes to using these herbal substances. I really do wonder how much of the effect is down to the belief in the thing working. Now, this is one of the most widely studied fields in medicine, is the placebo effect. There was a paper that I was reading not so long ago that told people, two groups of people, they both had, or maybe it was one group of people, who had gastrointestinal symptoms. And they said to the people, okay, we're going to give you a medicine now that's really good at alleviating gastrointestinal symptoms. And what they gave them was Ipecac.
What's that?
Ipecac is it's an emetic. It's a plant that basically induces nausea, vomiting, and diarrhea. Basically purges the body. So the people had gastrointestinal problems, the nausea and the vomiting or whatever. They gave them Ipecac, the stuff that's meant to exacerbate these symptoms, but told them they were giving them a medicine that actually alleviated those problems. And their symptoms went away. So it was the power of expectation that had the effect, not the drug, not the herb. So when someone comes into your clinic and you say, look, I'm going to give you turmeric, and turmeric's really good anti-inflammatory and it does this and this and this, and maybe this is like 10, 15 years ago before turmeric was popular and people didn't really understand what it was. Did it work because it's turmeric, or did it work because they believe in you and they trust your knowledge and you've got good relationship with them and they expect that this therapy is going to work because you're really held in high regard and you've had good reviews and you charge a lot of money and blah, blah, blah? Or is it a bit of both? There was so many of these nocebo, placebo experiments. There was one that was done with a group of asthmatics. Now, they were told initially that they were going to be given a substance which induces asthma attacks. So the doctors came and gave them the substance, and lo and behold, they all start getting asthma attacks. And then the doctor said, okay, we can see you're getting the asthma attack. We're going to give you the medicine now to basically abort the asthma attack. We're going to give you the vasodilator now. They gave them the drug and their asthma attack went away. But the interesting thing is that they had swapped the interventions around. So they actually gave them the therapy first, and then they gave them the allergen whilst they were having the asthma attack. So the drug, the therapy, induced the attack because they were told that it was the allergen, and then the actual allergen reversed the asthma attack because they were told it was a drug. So that power of expectation alone is really powerful. Now, we don't have those kinds of trials that have been done in any sort of large scale on a lot of these herbs. We simply believe that they're working a certain way because we've got this traditional evidence, but we've never investigated the power of the mind and its impact on this. So when you say, I don't know what the mechanism is, yeah, I'm with you on that one. I don't know either. Is it placebo? Is it actually some kind of mechanism inside the body? And if so, what is that mechanism? How do you actually verify and validate what that is? I think all we can do is give the thing and observe the effect, and then you might be able to come up with some crafty placebo-controlled trials to work out how much of the effect is down to placebo or nocebo, and that will give you some indication as to what effect is physiological and what effect is actually psychological.
And Dan, remember, in the check system, the number one foundational factor is positive thoughts. The most important factor in the check system is your thoughts.
Yeah, you have to have the conviction and the belief, the unwavering belief that you have the power to heal yourself. So if you don't believe you can heal, but you get all the right therapies, you're going to be able to get better? Maybe, maybe not. If you're given all the right therapies and you believe that you can heal, are you going to get better? Maybe, maybe not. There's studies out there where people changed nothing. They didn't change their diet. They didn't change their lifestyle. They didn't do any fancy detox programs. They didn't do any of that. They had basically end-stage cancer. They were lied to by their doctors and told they were being given the miracle cure. And all they got was saline, and their cancer went away basically overnight. Many of these documented cases in the literature. So it was all down to the person's belief. Now, if we're told, like, this is why it's important to have a proper understanding about what disease and health actually is, Lee. Because if you have an idea in your mind that disease is a bad thing and it's going to get you and it's your body doing something wrong and there's no hope and there's no cure for it, your body's broken, you're broken. If you tell yourself that story, can you heal yourself? If you actually have an understanding about disease, which is different, that disease is actually the answer to the problem and it's your body trying to do something right and it's trying to save your life and it's doing the right thing by you, and that your body is amazing, that it's remarkable, that it has a very good ability to heal itself when you give it what it needs and you take away what it doesn't. If you have that perspective, maybe you'll be able to have a better chance at healing yourself. So I think a lot of this is, yeah, you're right. It's in the story that we tell ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, just going back to the 6 foundation factors, the idea is that to have optimal health, you need all 6 in place. It just happens to be that your thoughts are your most important. Obviously, breathing's pretty important too, right? Because without breath, yeah, the obvious thing, cells begin to die, but breathing correctly is important. Hydration, mostly water, Obviously, we've spoken about diet, movement, again, absolutely crucial. Sleep / circadian rhythm. So again, living in alignment with sunrise and sundown. All those things are really important. And, I'm sure you would agree, Dan, it's pretty much in alignment with what you've been saying. Let's get those foundations in place. Let's live in alignment with nature. And then when we do that, we don't need anything else.
Yeah, those natives didn't have any hospitals or any of this fancy stuff. They didn't even have an understanding about, well, our so-called modern understanding about what disease is and what's going on inside the body. They didn't have fancy drugs or whatever else, but they were all healthy. They didn't have dietitians. They didn't have nutritionists telling them what to eat. So if they can do it, if they'd worked it out, why is it so difficult for us?
Yeah.
I think it's much, much more simple than we've been led to believe, Lee.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And the answer to that question, why are we in the state we are, that's a whole nother episode.
Indeed.
Because that covers so many different aspects. So Dan, what's next for you? Have you got another book in the pipeline?
Yeah, I've got a few things in the pipeline, Lee. Probably get another book out at some stage. I feel still a little bit worn out from the last one because that took me 4 years to write, and I was really just need a little break. But yeah, I have a website called humanly.com, and I run some little short courses and things on there. So I'm about to release a 5-week short course in the next month or so, where it will just be basically going into more detail about these really basic fundamental principles and putting the power back into people's hands, because this stuff's really simple. Once people understand it, they go, actually, hey, I can do this. I don't need a fancy person in a white coat I don't need the arbiter to health, the gatekeeper that controls these so-called therapeutics to get me better. I can do a lot of this myself. Once people realize that and they can make these simple changes, they can get some pretty profound benefits to their health. And it's just like really general stuff. So yeah, that's sort of my next little project that I'm working on that'll be coming out shortly. And then after that, I've got ideas for probably about 4 or 5 more books, but if each one takes me 4 years to write, it's like 20 years of work. So that won't be coming anytime soon.
Sounds great. And I'll make sure your links are in the show notes as well.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks so much, Lee. It was a real pleasure talking with you again. It's always good to touch base with like-minded people who sort of see this for what it is. It's nice.
Absolutely, yeah. And thanks again for coming back on. And this is possibly my longest ever episode. So I really appreciate your time, and really appreciate your insights. And I'm really sure that the audience are going to love this episode as well.
Yeah, no worries, Lee. It's a real honor. Really appreciate you giving me the opportunity to have a chat, and hopefully people think a little bit laterally from this conversation. And certainly, don't start running off and changing all kinds of things in your diet and your lifestyle based on this discussion. Just use it as a seed that is planted to maybe get you thinking laterally about a few things and put a different lens on through which you view the world and then through which you view health. Thanks, Lee.
Awesome. So that's all from Daniel and me for this week, but be sure to tune in same time, same place next week for an exciting new episode of the Radical Health Rebel podcast, now under its brand new name. I'll see you then. Thanks for watching this video, and don't forget to like the video and please share with your friends and family. And thank you for your support and being part of the Radical Health Rebel tribe.